I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look at them. I just slid the yellowed parchment across the polished oak conference table, a 1923 senior water rights deed, federally stamped and still ironclad. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was surgical. Maggie Thornwell blinked once. The smug smile she'd worn for 18 months dissolved like sugar in floodwater. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and walked to the window. Outside, Willowbrook Estates glistened in the morning sun. 5 McMansions now had water lapping at their back patios. Decorative mulch beds floated like lily pads. Maggie's prized white B&W, half submerged on her freshly landscaped lakefront driveway. Water doesn't need permission, it just needs memory. And for 45 years we'd held it back for the good of this land, until they paved over my family's history and called it progress. Let me introduce myself. My name's Jake Morrison, and this is how I flooded 35 homes, legally. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because what you're about to hear is how a quiet dam, a dusty deed, and a single gate exposed an entire empire built on stolen ground. They say land remembers. Every fence post, every cattle trail, every footprint baked into the clay under a Texas sun. If that's true, then my family's 47 acres just outside Austin are filled with memories older than most subdivisions in this county. My grandfather, everyone called him Pops, bought the land in 1955, back when Austin was still mostly barbecue joints, feed stores, and college kids driving beat-up Chevys. Pops was a World War II vet, a man who believed in 2 things above all else: taking care of the land and taking care of your word. He didn't say much, but when he did, you listened. And when he shook your hand, that was the end of it. No paperwork needed. The land was rolling and wild, dotted with mesquites and bluebonnets, bordered by a shallow creek that only really flowed after spring storms. Pops worked it slow and steady, cattle, some vegetables, and just enough hay to get through winter. But he always said the back 40 acres, the part closest to Willow Creek, would be worth something someday. Not for sale, worth something. In 1978, after back-to-back years of brutal droughts, Pops did something smart. He built a dam. Nothing flashy, just a well-packed earthwork wall, 3 feet tall and 200 feet wide, curving into the terrain like it had always been there. The Army Corps of Engineers had sent some folks out to advise just basic flood control and water storage. He even paid for his own survey and runoff analysis. Pops believed in doing things right the first time. That little dam changed everything. It collected enough runoff during rainy season to help his cattle through the summer and provided downstream relief for neighbors whose wells went dry. He never charged a penny. That's what neighbors are for, he'd say, checking the water gauge with a cup of black coffee and a weathered journal. That's how I learned about stewardship, not from books, but from muddy boots and creek water running clear. I was 10 when I caught my first catfish down there, 11 when I shot my first deer on the ridge above the pasture. Pops taught me how to track, how to read cloud cover, and how to listen to the wind when it shifts. That land raised me just as much as he did. Eventually, I followed in his footsteps. ROTC, then active duty. By the time I was 24, I was deployed with the Army Corps of Engineers, Middle East, Northern Africa, flood mitigation and combat zone water infrastructure. Turns out, managing water in a war zone teaches you a lot about how precious it is and how fast people will fight over it. But while I was digging wells and rebuilding levees in Kandahar, time was moving without me. Pops got sick during my second tour. My sister Sarah, God bless her, handled the trust in the funeral while I was halfway across the world. He passed on a Tuesday. I found out on a Thursday. He left everything to both of us. But Sarah lives in California, and the only thing she knows about Texas land law is that it exists. So she hired a property management company to keep the taxes paid and the grass cut. That was the last time we really talked about the land. I assumed it was safe. I assumed our name still meant something down at the courthouse. And I assumed Pops's dam would keep holding steady, just like always. Turns out I was wrong on all 3 counts. War teaches you how to see patterns before they form. Infrastructure, enemy movement, drought patterns. If you don't see what's coming before it hits, you're already too late. Unfortunately, I didn't apply that instinct to my own land. I was too focused on saving lives overseas to notice what was being quietly stolen back home. After Pops passed, Sarah placed the property into a trust. Nothing unusual there. She hired a local outfit, Lonier Land Services, to handle basic maintenance and tax payments. I skimmed their emails from time to time. Everything looked fine. Photos of mowed grass, receipts for septic inspections, auto-pay tax confirmations. But that's the thing about surface-level updates. They don't show you what's happening below the dirt line. While I was rebuilding levees in Helmand Province, a woman named Maggie Thornwell was redrawing boundaries back in Texas, lines that cut right through my family's history like a bulldozer through barbed wire. Maggie is the kind of woman who speaks in soft tones and wears tennis whites like armor. President of the Willowbrook Estates, HOA, age 52, drives a white BMW X7 with vanity plates that say "Vive Pride." Married to Rick Thornwell, city councilman and former real estate developer turned zoning committee chair. The kind of couple who gets things done, usually for themselves. It started small, a sidewalk here, a community garden there, the kind of developments no one questions until it's too late. But what Maggie really had her eye on was expansion. And what lay adjacent to Willowbrook Estates. 47 acres of what she considered unused pasture land. Except it wasn't unused, it was just quiet, it was resting, like good land does between seasons. But to Maggie, silence looks like opportunity, and with no active residence on the deed, she saw a crack in the door and kicked it wide open. She filed a claim under Texas adverse possession law. If someone openly occupies land, improves it, and pays taxes on it for a certain period, often 10 years, they can claim ownership. But there's a loophole. If you can show improvement and nobody challenges it early, the timer starts ticking. And if the true owner isn't present to fight it, well, the land changes hands. The HOA submitted permits for a community wellness expansion zone, code for a luxury cul-de-sac. They rerouted the nearby service road, paved new water lines, and began grading my back. The earth shifted, legally and literally, while I was busy demining irrigation routes on the other side of the world. To grease the process, Rick fast-tracked a zoning reclassification from agricultural to residential development. The vote passed 4-1. Rick abstained, of course, for the optics. But by the time the ink dried, my grandfather's cattle land was legally rezoned for executive homes with granite nannercot and rooftop solar panels. And no one told me a damn thing. It wasn't until I came back stateside in August 2023 that I noticed the mail looked off. My inbox had a stack of formal letters from the city zoning notices, permit updates, even a notice of land improvement credits. One of them included a full rendering of a planned Willowbrook Ridge Estates Phase 3 development. I zoomed in on the diagram. My dam was still there but labeled as decorative lake feature. That's when it hit me. They weren't just building homes. They were building on my water. The dam Pops built to support the community was now being used to sell it back to them as an amenity, and because the creek was seasonal and unmonitored for most of the year, Maggie's developers had quietly installed underground irrigation pipes that diverted the flow away from the downstream farms and into their development's new artificial ponds. They weren't just trespassing, they were replumbing history. When I confronted the local land office, the clerk looked at me like I was a ghost. "You're the Morrison heir?" she asked, shuffling papers. "I thought y'all had moved out years ago." "No ma'am, we never moved. We were just quiet, and now that I'm home, I won't be quiet anymore." There's a sound Texas gravel makes when it crunches under your boots after a long absence. It's not just dirt, it's memory. And that August morning in 2023, standing at the edge of my grandfather's land for the first time in 4 years, it didn't sound like home. It sounded violated. What was once open pasture was now crawling with activity. Concrete trucks lined the gravel path. Wooden survey stakes stabbed the earth like spears. Portable toilets, neon safety vests, and the ever-present drone of machinery had replaced the chorus of cicadas and wind in the mesquite. It wasn't just development, it was invasion. I walked down what used to be a cattle trail but now served as a temporary service road. I stopped at the base of the dam, Pops Dam. The earthwork still stood solid, but the water behind it, our water, was murky, stagnant and lower than it had ever been. The spillway stones were dry. Up on the ridge, a yellow hard hat caught my eye. A construction foreman barked orders into a walkie. I climbed the incline, boots kicking dust, and approached him. "Excuse me," I said. "What the hell is this?" He looked me up and down, squinting. "Sorry, buddy. You lost? This is private property. Willowbrook Ridge Phase 3. "No," I said. "This is Morrison Ranch." He gave a lazy shrug and tapped the clipboard hanging from his belt. "We've got permits. Zoning's clean. This development's already sold through escrow. You'll have to take it up with the HOA." That's when I heard it. The soft hum of an electric motor. I turned. A golf cart rounded the corner, white and gleaming, moving too fast for something so smug. It pulled up beside us, and out stepped Maggie Thornwell. Tennis skirt, visor, oversized sunglasses, lipstick too perfect for the heat. She looked like she'd stepped out of a luxury spa brochure and into a war zone. Well, well, she smiled. You must be Jake Morrison. We've heard so much about you. Funny, I said. I haven't heard a damn thing about you. She didn't flinch, her smile only widened. Your sister's done a fine job maintaining the property, but since it's been unoccupied, the community felt it was best to put it to productive use. For the greater good. I stared at her, stunned. This is my family's land. She stepped closer, still smiling. Your family abandoned this land, honey. The city saw it as dormant, underutilized, neglected. We're building a community here, safe streets, happy families, strong neighborhoods. And you think that gives you the right to steal it? She didn't answer, just gestured to the rising skeletons of luxury homes behind her, as if they were proof of something divine. You're welcome to attend one of our HOA planning sessions, she said sweetly. We always value feedback. Then she leaned in, her voice lowering to a syrupy whisper. But if I were you, I'd be careful. People don't take kindly to troublemakers, especially not ones with military baggage. The words hit like a sucker punch wrapped in lace. She smiled again, climbed into her cart, and drove off. I stood frozen, staring at what used to be our back pasture, at the survey markers now crisscrossing the land like veins of entitlement, at the houses rising from the soil like tumors. And then I noticed something else. A narrow trench running from the creek bed near the dam's base all the way to the edge of the construction site. PVC piping snaked through it like an artery, freshly glued, buried halfway, leading directly to the development's ornamental pond. They were actively stealing water in real time. Pops built that dam for stewardship. These people were bleeding it dry for curb appeal. I knelt down and scooped a handful of dust from the cracked creek bed, rubbed it between my fingers. That was the moment the mission changed. This wasn't just about land anymore, this was about legacy, about the weaponization of bureaucracy, about how HOA Karens in golf carts had turned civil engineering into warfare by other means. In me, I was about to return fire. I've studied battlefield sabotage in Kandahar. I've seen villages cut off from water by enemies who understood that thirst breaks a man faster than bullets. But I never imagined I'd come home to find that same tactic used by an HOA with a mission statement about beautification and community spirit. After that confrontation with Maggie, I drove straight to the Travis County Courthouse, marched through 3 departments until someone handed me the zoning file for parcel 47-1A, the same one that had belonged to my grandfather since 19. That file was thick. Inside, stamped permits, emails, zoning maps, and city council meeting transcripts. Rick Thornwell's signature was all over it. His fingerprints were on the emergency motion that reclassified my family's land from agricultural to residential expansion zone, a motion fast-tracked while I was overseas and quietly pushed through during the lowest attended council meeting of the year. The public comment period skipped in the interest of timely infrastructure alignment. That's politician code for we did it while no one was watching. What made it worse? Sarah had unknowingly signed paperwork from Lone Air Land Services, the property managers she hired, that allowed routine inspections, but hidden in the language was a clause granting non-intrusive utility surveying rights to HOA subcontractors. That's how they got in, that's how they mapped the water system, cataloged the terrain, and made plans to drain the heart out of our land before we ever knew what hit us. I called Sarah. Her voice cracked the second she heard mine. Jake, I didn't know, I swear. They sent updates, but it all looked like maintenance work. I thought you were handling the legal stuff. I was getting mortared, Sarah. I'm so sorry. I told her it wasn't her fault, because it wasn't. It was mine for assuming people like Maggie played fair, for thinking a family name still meant something in a town where city officials were sleeping with the developers under their own roofs. So, I did what Pops would have done. I lawyered up. First guy I found was out of Dallas, big firm, crisp suit, said all the right things. Quoted me $85,000 just to begin challenging the zoning change, not to win, just to start. That didn't include court filings, environmental surveys, or any appeals. He called it an uphill battle.
No kidding.
I asked him point blank, can I win? He leaned back, folded his hands and said, depends how much you're willing to lose. I walked out. See, I didn't need a suit with hourly billing. I needed leverage, and leverage lives in the fine print. So I started reading. Pulled every document tied to the dam, every Army Corps file, every original easement. Found yellowing copies of a 1978 civil engineering submission, still signed in Pops's steady hand, tucked inside a box labeled obsolete watershed projects. But the ink may have faded. The law hadn't. The Army Corps had granted my grandfather a federal permit for small-scale flood mitigation and agricultural watershed support. That meant the dam wasn't just a glorified pond, it was a federally recognized water management structure. And here's your first knowledge nugget. Any water structure developed under federal jurisdiction falls outside HOA or municipal override. Local zoning can't nullify it. Period. I held the permit like a weapon. Because it was one. Suddenly, the McMansions Maggie built weren't just an eyesore, they were a liability built below a federally governed flood structure. That same day, I drove to the Water Resources Board and filed a formal ownership verification request for the water rights associated with Willow Creek. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "You got seniority?" "We'll see," I said. It would take a few days to process, but I had a hunch, and it wasn't based on luck, it was based on Pops. He planned everything like war. I had a feeling the paper trail he left was about to become my greatest ally. That night I sat on the porch of the old farmhouse watching the moonlight reflect off the still, strangled pool behind the dam. I thought about what Maggie said, the land was abandoned. No, it wasn't, it was just sleeping, waiting for someone to remember what it meant to be a steward, not a seller. They thought I'd roll over. They thought the paperwork was too dense. They thought a soldier wouldn't know how to fight in court. But I wasn't planning to fight in court, not yet. I was planning to build a case so airtight, so brutal in its truth, that when the tide turned it would drown everything in its path. The next morning I went back to the dam with a tape measure and a water flow gauge I'd borrowed from a friend who works for the Agricultural Extension Office. I wanted hard numbers, not gut feelings. The gut can get angry, but numbers don't lie. The readings told me everything I feared. Water flow had dropped by 68% compared to the seasonal average for August, which made no sense because the previous month had one of the wettest rainfall spikes in 5 years. The creek should have been humming like a summer song. Instead, it wheezed like it had asthma. I followed the dry bed downstream, tracing the path of the old Willow Creek channel. About 400 yards from the dam I spotted it, not some erosion cut or cattle path. This was intentional. Clean angles. Laser-level depth. A row of PVC pipe embedded halfway in and neatly packed with gravel. It ran straight out of the creek and veered east, directly toward Willowbrook Estates. I followed it until it disappeared beneath a slab foundation labeled Lot 14 on the HOA's website. There, beside a decorative rock garden, sat a bubbling water feature that looked suspiciously well-fed for a region in drought watch status. They were diverting the creek, actively, secretly, illegally. I documented everything. Photos, GPS coordinates, time-stamped flow measurements. I installed trail cameras camouflaged in cedar brush at the dam's intake point and another facing the diversion trench. That night, I saw the lights again, the kind that don't belong. White work vans showing up after dark. Flashlights moving along the trench line. Shovels scraping. At first I thought they were construction workers doing overtime. Then I realized they were covering their tracks. Literally. They backfilled part of the diversion trench and scattered brush over it. Someone even sprayed hydroseed in patches to make it look like undisturbed earth. It was deliberate, coordinated, surgical. And it wasn't just about stealing water. It was about choking out the legacy my grandfather built, 1 gallon at a time. The next morning, I tried to file a complaint with the city's water integrity office. A polite receptionist took my information and promised a callback. Nothing came. I emailed the Environmental Oversight Division. Crickets. So I drove down to the office in person. That's when I saw the nameplate on the door. Director of Zoning and Resource Planning, Rick Thornwell. Of course, the fox was guarding the henhouse, writing the fire code and charging rent to the chickens. Later that week, I received a formal notice from the HOA. This letter serves as an official advisory that your property contains an unsafe dam structure which may pose significant risk to the surrounding neighborhood. Willowbrook Estates requests immediate safety review and action to avoid potential liability for damages. It was printed on heavy cream stationery, embossed, sealed. On the same day, I spotted a local news van parked 2 roads over. I watched as Maggie stood on freshly laid sod with a reporter, crocodile tears in her eyes. "We're just concerned about our children's safety. That dam hasn't been inspected in decades. What happens if it fails? These are families with babies and toddlers living right downstream." I almost choked. Pops had the dam inspected every 10 years like clockwork. The last inspection was 20 months ago, certified safe, compliant, and over-engineered. But facts don't trend on Facebook. Fear does. Maggie wasn't just building houses, she was building a narrative. And then came the next door posts. I don't use that app, but Sarah saw them and called me in a panic. Have you seen what they're saying? Jake, it's bad. Maggie had written a community safety advisory claiming an unstable individual had returned to the area, recently discharged from military service, exhibiting erratic behavior, and engaging in threatening actions on nearby properties. She never said my name. She didn't have to. In a small town like ours, unstable veteran, dangerous property might as well be a GPS pin. It got worse. Over the next 3 weeks, I got hit with a surprise wellness check from the VA crisis unit, 3 noise complaints. I had country music on while fixing a tractor, a building code citation for my barn, which had stood since, a septic system violation, except mine had passed inspection just 6 months ago, and then came the ultimate insult. A city council hearing notice, fast-tracked, emergency session. The agenda item: proposal for eminent domain seizure of unsafe private property adjacent to Willowbrook Estates. They were trying to steal the rest of the land, legally. They weren't just playing dirty, they were playing bureaucratic chess. 3 moves ahead, and I was stuck swatting at flies while they poisoned the well, both literally and politically. But here's the thing Maggie didn't account for. You don't back a man into a corner if that man knows how to build exits. And I'd spent the last decade building exits for people trapped in war zones. This land wasn't just dirt. That dam wasn't just a structure. And Willow Creek wasn't just a trickle in a pipe. It was a federal waterway, and they had just started a fight they didn't understand. I spent the next week where most modern wars are won. Not on a battlefield, but in a courthouse basement, surrounded by filing cabinets and the faint smell of old paper and mildew. The Travis County archives don't look like much. Fluorescent lights hum overhead. The chairs are the kind that punish your spine. But if you know what to look for, you can uncover the kind of weapons that don't go bang but hit harder than any rifle ever could. I requested every document tied to our land, title records, utility permits, tax assessments, water usage filings, and dam construction paperwork. The clerk handed me 2 cardboard boxes with a post-it note that said Morrison. Inside were 4 decades of history, layered, yellowed, and waiting. It didn't take long to find the first crack in their plan. A 1978 construction permit signed by Pops, stamped by the Army Corps of Engineers. It authorized the creation of an agricultural watershed dam for flood mitigation and livestock support. That dam wasn't a personal project. It was a federally recognized structure, built under Army Corps advisement, designed to hold back and redirect seasonal flows from Willow Creek. That alone made it immune to HOA interference. But then I found something better. A manila envelope labeled water, priority rights. Inside, folded and fragile with age, was a deed dated 1923. My great-grandfather, Pops's father, had purchased senior water rights for the entire Willow Creek watershed, before there was even a municipal water board. The ink was faded, but the legal language was precise. The rights weren't temporary. They weren't revocable. They were perpetual, tied to the land and its use for agricultural and environmental support. Which meant this: every drop of water Maggie's HOA had diverted into their luxury koi ponds, every gallon rerouted through PVC under their granite countertop McMansions, every artificially maintained creek-inspired water feature they bragged about in real estate brochures, it all legally belonged to me. They weren't just trespassing, they weren't just rezoning, they were actively stealing federally protected resources. And because those rights were purchased before modern water districts even existed, I didn't need their permission to enforce them. I drove home that night with a fire in my chest and a folder of copies on the passenger seat like a loaded magazine. I didn't need a lawyer to make threats. I needed paperwork, and now I had it. The next morning, I filed 3 formal complaints, one with the EPA, one with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and one with the U.S. Army Corps Regional Office. I attached high-resolution images of the dam, water diversion evidence, the original permit, and the 1923 deed. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't even speaking. I was just letting the facts talk for me. By that afternoon, I got a call from an old friend, Tony Riggs. We served together in Afghanistan. He now worked in enforcement at the EPA. "Jake," he said, his voice low and serious, "I just saw your file come across my desk. Is this real?" "Dead real. You know what this means, right?" "I'm starting to." He whistled quietly. "Okay, first thing you need to know, if they diverted a natural waterway without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation. If your dam has federal jurisdiction and the HOA development interfered with its intended purpose, that's a separate offense. We're not talking about civil code here, we're talking about federal law. You might be holding the stick of dynamite under their entire operation." I hung up with my head buzzing. not with confusion, with clarity. While Maggie was staging photo ops about public safety, while Rick was fast-tracking eminent domain votes with his developer buddies, I was gathering legal artillery. They had bulldozers. I had a signature from 1923 and a dam that hadn't failed in 45 years. That night, I drove to the creek and stood on the edge of the dry channel. I held the old deed under the stars and read it line by line, like scripture. Then I walked the perimeter of the dam and took fresh flow measurements, backed up by trail cam footage and time-stamped environmental data. I uploaded it all to a secure drive, with a backup stored in a military cloud server I still had access to from deployment days. If they tried to bury this story, they'd have to bury the internet. Sarah called me later that night. She was crying. They came to my house, she said. What? Maggie, she flew out here. Said she was worried about your mental health. Brought printed articles about you, about the VA, about soldiers who go unstable. Tried to convince me to convince you to sell. I gritted my teeth. What did you say? I told her if she ever contacted me again, I'd call the FBI. That's when I realized how far they were willing to go. This wasn't just a zoning dispute, this was an extraction operation disguised as neighborhood development. A hostile takeover in pastel polo shirts. But they'd overlooked one critical thing. I wasn't a civilian. I'd spent my adult life learning how to defend infrastructure in hostile environments, how to document threats under pressure, and how to protect critical resources against well-organized enemies. And now, I had the documents that turned the tables. They thought I was some disgruntled veteran with a rusty truck and a fading legacy. What they didn't know was that I had federal protection, historical water rights, a floodgate engineered for emergencies, and the moral high ground of 3 generations. And soon, the water would rise. They didn't come at me with bulldozers next. They came with clipboards and smiles. That's how you know it's war in America, when the paperwork starts showing up faster than the people causing the damage. The first was a county building inspector. He arrived unannounced, uninvited, and unusually eager for a man wearing city-issue boots. He spent 25 minutes circling my front porch like a vulture, tapping the foundation with a ballpoint pen and muttering things like non-compliant elevation and potential subsidence indicators. He handed me a citation that said I'd need to pay for a structural assessment. $8,000 minimum, he estimated, or face condemnation proceedings. That porch had stood since it had survived 3 hurricanes, 4 floods, and Pops's stubborn refusal to ever replace the original timber. But apparently now, it was a danger to society. The next day, animal control showed up, said they'd received reports of unlicensed livestock. I didn't even have livestock anymore. Just 2 old goats and a rescued border collie named Rex, who'd been Pops's shadow for a decade. Still, I was given a formal warning. 3 days later, fire safety compliance dropped by. The week after that, it was the septic tank again, despite the inspection I'd passed earlier that year. They were testing me, not with force but with attrition. The slow bleed of time, energy, and money. The kind of bureaucratic warfare that doesn't make headlines, but breaks people all the same. I started to feel it, the pressure, the exhaustion. Every day there was something else. New letters in the mailbox, new complaints filed with the sheriff, new whispers around town about the unstable veteran up by the ridge. That one spread like wildfire. Maggie had done her work well. The day the Veteran Services lady showed up was the day I truly understood the game they were playing. She was polite, apologetic. Said she'd received a referral from the city, had to follow up. Just protocol. Asked if I had firearms in the house, if I'd had any recent thoughts of self-harm, if I had a support system. I answered calmly, respectfully, but inside I was seething. Not at her, she was doing her job. No, my anger was aimed squarely at Maggie. She wasn't just trying to take my land, she was trying to destroy my character, brick by brick, in the court of public opinion. Because if she could get enough people to see me as dangerous, unbalanced, unstable, then seizing the land wouldn't look like theft. It would look like a public safety measure. They knew the legal case was slipping out of their hands, so they turned to psychological warfare. And here's the thing about that kind of attack, it works. For a while I couldn't sleep. I started second-guessing myself. I stared at my grandfather's journal every night and wondered if I was doing the right thing, or if they were right. Maybe I was too close to it, too angry, too proud. But then the trail cam started catching them. 3 men in black polos, HOA board members. They parked a golf cart at the entrance of my property and sat there for hours, documenting who came and went. They filmed me repairing a fence, took pictures when a neighbor dropped off groceries. They even called in a suspicious activity report when a Vietnam vet buddy of mine brought over a tractor part. That's when I knew I wasn't paranoid. They were building a case, a narrative, a dossier of twisted facts and half-truths, ready to feed to whichever judge or agency Maggie could manipulate next. So I adjusted. I stopped reacting and started documenting. Every visit, every violation, every false claim. I logged it all. I installed more trail cams, hidden, high-res, motion-triggered. I uploaded footage to a secure server, time-stamped and geotagged. I recorded phone calls, took photos, saved every envelope with postmarks. If they wanted a paper war, I'd bury them in proof. One morning, as I was reviewing the footage, I caught something that made my stomach turn. A man late 40s, wearing a generic maintenance uniform, kneeling beside the dam's control hatch. He had a cordless drill in one hand and what looked like a bag of concrete mix in the other. He was trying to sabotage the hydraulic system. I called Tony. He didn't hesitate. "That's a felony," he said. "Send me everything." An hour later, a federal EPA agent called to confirm they'd received my submission. He didn't make promises, just said, "We're watching now." That was the moment the fear started to fade. Not because I felt safe, far from it, but because I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I had allies, I had footage, I had law, and most importantly, I had the truth. Sarah called again that evening. Her voice had more steel in it this time. "They called me again," she said. "Offered $400,000, cash, no paperwork, just walk away." "Did you laugh?" "No," she said. "I told them to go to hell." I hung up the phone and looked out across the land. The sun was setting behind the hill, casting long shadows over the field where Pops used to walk at dusk. I thought about the sacrifices it took to keep this land in our name. The sweat, the time, the quiet pride. And I knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about refusal, a refusal to be erased, bullied, or bought, a refusal to watch water stolen, legacy paved over, and decency replaced with HOA bylaws. They thought they could break me with paperwork. What they didn't realize was, I just turned it into a weapon. There's a moment in every operation where the chaos starts to align, where the storm of threats, insults, paperwork, and doubt crystallizes into something that feels like clarity. That moment came for me at 3 with a standing at the dam in full darkness, trail camera in one hand, Pops's old journal in the other, and the sound of willow branches whispering in the breeze. The sabotage attempt had confirmed it. They weren't just trying to bankrupt me, harass me, or bury me under violations. They were trying to disable the dam, because Maggie knew what I knew, that this wasn't just a pile of packed earth. It was leverage. It was the hinge point of everything they'd built downstream. If the dam stood, so did my rights. If it failed, or if it stayed silent, so did their false claim to ownership. So, I made a decision. Not out of anger, but out of precision. I would activate the dam's emergency spillway. Not recklessly, not out of spite, but surgically and with documentation. I would do it not to cause damage, but to restore the creek to its natural flow path, the one it had followed for hundreds of years before Maggie rerouted it like a garden hose into her subdivision fountains. But first, I needed intel. Real, technical data. I pulled the original 1978 Army Corps spillway blueprint from my file cabinet. Pops had kept it all. Diagrams, slope measurements, maximum capacity numbers, a maintenance log going back decades. According to the specs, the dam was capable of holding just over 3.1 million gallons before overflow risk began. With the recent rains, I was sitting just above 2.9. That meant I had margin, but not for long. I launched the drone, high resolution, GPS locked, military grade, flew it over the entire development. It recorded everything: foundation lines, artificial pond elevation, runoff trenches, downspout locations. I calculated that 5 homes sat directly inside the historical creek channel. 3 more had their basements built below the 100-year seasonal high water mark. Worse, the HOA's engineers had laid concrete decorative creek beds, shallow, U-shaped gutters dressed up with landscaping. But they weren't connected to the storm drain system. They were just for show, which meant the moment real water started flowing again, natural water, those homes would be sitting ducks. But that wasn't my goal. I wasn't here to flood homes. I was here to prove they should never have been built there to begin with. So I called Tony again. "You serious about enforcement?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "If you've got the paperwork and the data, I've got the EPA's attention. I'm planning a controlled release, emergency maintenance and watershed restoration. Completely within federal permit guidelines. When? 3 days. Sunrise. Weather forecast says heavy rain coming Thursday night. I want the operation finished before then. I'll make sure federal eyes are watching, he said. Jake, make it clean. No drama, no chaos, just water doing what it's supposed to do. Copy that. The next call was to Amanda Cross, environmental attorney, local, tough, no patience for HOA nonsense. She'd worked pro bono for farmers who had their irrigation stolen, ranchers sued by developers, and once took down an oil company trying to dump brine water into a wildlife corridor. I sent her everything: permits, water rights, inspection reports, satellite maps, trail cam videos, audio recordings, the works. She called me the next morning. Jake, you don't need a defense, she said. You have a case. You'll take it? I'll lead it. She filed 3 motions that same day. A federal complaint under the Clean Water Act, a petition for injunction against further HOA construction, and a declaration of emergency water rights activation under Texas agricultural law. Then we got to work building the narrative. Because Maggie wasn't just going to sit back, she was going to spin it as an attack, a mental breakdown, another veteran loses it and harms community headline. So we beat her to the punch. Miguel Santos, whose family farm lay just downstream, agreed to speak to the media. His family had relied on Willow Creek water since 1887. They'd lost nearly half their crop yield since the diversion. Mrs. Chen, my elderly neighbor, offered her garden as a visual. The before and after photos were heartbreaking, lush rows of beans and squash withering into cracked soil. Amanda reached out to the Sierra Club and the Audubon Society. They didn't just support us. They showed up, with field biologists, press contacts, and infrared drone footage of nesting birds displaced by the creek diversion. I sent advance notice of the spillway operation to every relevant agency: the fire department, county emergency services, the EPA, and the Army Corps Regional Office. I also filed a 24-hour public notice at City Hall. Every box, check. By the time Maggie caught wind, it was too late to block it through paperwork, so she turned to what she knew best: optics. She posted on every neighborhood forum, claimed an unstable individual was threatening to flood homes, scheduled a press conference, called in every favor she had on the local news beat. But I wasn't worried about her anymore, because the truth had momentum now, and water, once it knows its direction, doesn't stop. The day before the operation, I walked the dam with a wrench in one hand and Pops's journal in the other. I checked the hydraulic gate, still operational, still holding strong. I oiled the bolts, calibrated the pressure release valve, and stood for a long moment watching the surface of the reservoir shimmer beneath the evening sun. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. It was the land reclaiming its voice after being silenced for 2 years by greed, concrete, and corruption. And when the sun rose tomorrow with reporters watching and federal inspectors taking notes, that voice was going to speak again, not in rage but in flow. In a steady, unrelenting stream back into the channel where it belonged. I didn't build the flood, I released the truth. The morning air was thick with the scent of cedar and the weight of something inevitable, the kind of air that holds its breath before a storm, even if the clouds haven't arrived yet. I stood at the dam's control box at 6:02 a.m., dressed in boots, jeans, and a faded Army Corps windbreaker. On the hill above me, 2 EPA inspectors adjusted their clipboards, and a Channel 7 news van idled with its satellite dish spinning slowly toward the sky. To my right, Amanda paced with her phone in one hand and a folder in the other. Her expression didn't change when she spoke. Calm, razor-sharp, focused. She was preparing statements for the press, just in case Maggie decided to twist the moment into chaos. Because of course she would. At exactly 6:15 a.m., the fire department confirmed receipt of our operation schedule. Volunteer responders had been briefed and were positioned at the old service road checkpoint, not to intervene but to observe. Everything was by the book. Not a single screw turned without documentation, not a drop of water released without legal cover. Across the ridge, I spotted them. Lawn chairs, cell phones, signs. Maggie's people had shown up in force. 20 residents, maybe more, stationed along the HOA perimeter. They held up neon signs with slogans like "Protect Our Homes" and "Stop the Flood." Kids clung to their parents, some clearly confused, others already crying for reasons they didn't understand. The live stream had started 15 minutes earlier, hosted by Maggie herself, her voice trembling just enough to feel authentic. "He's opening the dam," she said, staring directly into her iPhone camera. "He's using military engineering to flood our community, and no one is stopping him." Behind her, Rick was pacing with a tablet, trying to coordinate something. Legal intervention, maybe, or a last-ditch restraining order. But Amanda had already neutralized that threat. Judge Walsh had been served a recusal motion the night before. His courtroom influence was now under investigation for undisclosed campaign donations tied directly to Rick's construction firm. I tightened the final valve and waited for the cue. Tony Riggs stepped beside me, his EPA badge visible, his voice calm. "You ready?" "Been ready since the day they broke the creek," I said. At 6:30 a.m. sharp, I turned the key. The old hydraulic system groaned, then exhaled. The spillway gates opened with a mechanical click, and then the sound began low at first, like wind through dry leaves. Then it deepened, louder, heavier, the kind of sound water makes when it remembers where it's supposed to go. It wasn't violent, it wasn't fast, just deliberate. A silver sheet poured through the channel, carving its old path like it had never left. The sediment lifted, the grasses bent, and the first rocks shimmered beneath the returning current. On the HOA livestream, the panic was instant. "He's doing it!" Maggie screamed, turning the camera toward the channel. "He's flooding our neighborhood. He's endangering children." But nothing was flooding. Not a single drop strayed beyond the historic creek path. Not a yard submerged. Not a house even touched. Just water, flowing in the bed that had cradled it for generations before the first McMansion ever poured a slab. Downstream, Miguel Santos was waiting, his boots sunk into damp soil as the water reached the edge of his family's land. He knelt down, cupped the clear flow in both hands, and held it to his chest like a blessing. "This is the water my grandfather used," he said to no one and everyone. "It's back." Reporters started filming. Not Maggie, not me. The water, the restoration. Amanda gave her prepared statement, quoting the Clean Water Act, the Army Corps flood permit, the 1923 water deed. The reporters asked if this was an act of retaliation. She smiled and said, "No, this is compliance. This is legal stewardship. This is what responsible land management looks like." I stayed silent. I didn't need to speak. The dam was speaking for me. The water crept further, curling around fence lines, feeding dry stock ponds, irrigating Mrs. Chen's garden rows that hadn't seen moisture in nearly 2 years. I saw her on the hillside, hands folded, eyes wet. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Back at the HOA side, Maggie had gone from trembling voice to outright hysteria. She demanded federal agents shut down the operation. She accused me of terrorism, of violating peace agreements, of targeting families. Rick shouted into a phone, unaware that one of Amanda's assistants was recording everything from behind a press badge. But none of it mattered. Because in that moment, the only thing anyone cared about was the creek flowing exactly where it was supposed to be. Channel 7's anchor dropped the script and improvised. "It appears no flooding of residential areas has occurred. We're witnessing a controlled water release, legally documented under EPA supervision. What began as a neighborhood conflict is now being described by federal agents as a textbook restoration effort." Maggie's live stream shut off abruptly. The concrete trucks she'd ordered to block the spillway never arrived. Her backup legal team stopped answering calls. The story was shifting in real time, and she was losing control of it with every foot of water that returned to its natural course. I stayed at the dam for another hour, monitoring the flow, logging the rate, adjusting the valve once to reduce pressure. Then I stepped back, hands on my hips, as the sun broke fully over the ridge. The valley glowed. For the first time in almost 2 years, it looked right again. And Maggie? She'd built her empire on dry soil and stolen water. Now the soil was wet, the water was home, and her empire was starting to sink. I walked into that courtroom like a man carrying rain in his boots. Not angry, not loud, just steady. The kind of steady that comes from watching everything burn down around you and realizing you're the only one left holding the matches they didn't expect you to use. Judge Callahan presided, gray-haired and tired of everyone in the room before it even began. Maggie was already seated beside Rick and their 4th attorney in 6 months. Some out-of-town crisis manager wearing a too-bright tie and sweat already forming at the temples. Amanda sat beside me, calm as ever. She didn't bring a briefcase, just one leather folder. That's all she needed. The HOA had filed for a restraining order, claimed I had endangered lives, threatened the structural integrity of a community, acted in unstable, irrational ways unbecoming of a landowner. The words they used tried to sound clinical, but the message was clear. This man's a problem. Make him disappear. The judge began. "Mr. Morrison, do you understand why you're here?" "I do, Your Honor." "Do you dispute the facts of the controlled water release?" "No, sir. I documented it, filed it, executed it, legally." Rick leaned forward, whispering to his lawyer. Maggie looked smug, like they'd caught me confessing. Then Amanda stood up. "Your Honor, we're prepared to respond with Exhibits A through Q. They include federal permits, time-stamped trail cam footage, EPA coordination emails, media documentation, and pre-filed notices of intent logged with City Hall. The judge blinked. All that's been submitted? Yes, Your Honor. Certified and entered into record last Thursday. Rick's attorney objected. We were not made aware of any of these materials until this morning. Amanda didn't flinch. They were CC'd on all notifications. We have read receipts. She handed the judge a single flash drive. He inserted it into the monitor beside the bench. On the screen, a trail cam video. Time-stamped, night vision, clear as crystal. 3 HOA board members kneeling near my dam's hatch, caught tampering with a wrench and a bag of Quickery. The courtroom went still. Amanda continued. We also submit sworn statements from environmental agencies confirming the dam's operation was within legal thresholds. And we present financial records showing the HOA knowingly redirected creek flow to facilitate illegal expansion of their development onto protected land. The judge looked down at Rick. Mr. Davenport, is your name on these development filings? Rick hesitated. I was project lead, yes, but I didn't handle every permit directly. Amanda stepped forward, voice still calm. May I direct your attention to Exhibit G, an internal HOA email, signed by Mr. Davenport stating, and I quote, "Just bury the natural channel under the decorative creek bed. Jake won't be able to fight the paperwork." Maggie turned pale. Rick's mouth opened, then closed again. Do you deny sending that email, Mr. Davenport? The judge asked. Rick stood up, visibly shaking now. This is a witch hunt. He's manipulating the system, turning the government against us. He's a danger to this entire community. Callahan raised a hand. Sit down. Rick didn't. Instead, he pointed at me. You think this guy's a hero? He's a psycho with a wrench. He wants to flood homes and call it history. Amanda turned toward the judge, requesting immediate cessation of this outburst and recommendation for federal inquiry into HOA financial conduct based on our submitted evidence. The judge didn't even blink. Request granted. 2 marshals entered the room, calm, uniformed, precise. One stepped beside Rick, the other positioned near Maggie, who had started to fidget uncontrollably. Mr. Davenport, you are now under investigation for environmental sabotage, falsification of county documents, and obstruction of federal waterways. Rick's face crumpled. This isn't happening. He sat down, hard, the kind of sit that feels like the floor just gave out beneath you. The judge turned to me. Mr. Morrison, this court finds no basis for a restraining order. Furthermore, we recommend full federal review of the HOA's development practices, with additional consideration of criminal charges pending the outcome of those reviews. Amanda gave me a nod, small, respectful. I didn't say a word. Outside, the press was waiting. Microphones, cameras, drone coverage. I didn't give a statement. I didn't need to. The facts had done the talking. The footage had told the truth. And Rick's own mouth had done the rest. I got into my truck, turned the key, and rolled down the window as Amanda joined me. She looked toward the courthouse doors. They're going to try spinning this again, she said, but it's over. No, I said. This part is over. The land's still got work left. She nodded once, and we drove home. Back to where the water now ran clean, and the silence of victory flowed deeper than any scream. The creek made its own music now. Not the kind piped through HOA-approved Bluetooth rock speakers or artificial fountains sculpted by landscape architects. No, this was different. This was old music. The kind Pops used to say you could feel in your boots if you stood quiet enough and let your bones listen. It took a few weeks for the soil to soften again, for the scars left by excavators, concrete and greed to fade beneath clover, wild mint, and runoff from spring rain, but it happened. Slowly, persistently, like the land had been holding its breath all this time and finally remembered how to exhale. Mrs. Chen's garden came back first. Tomatoes, squash, even the stubborn herbs that had gone brown last summer, now stood tall and green, their leaves trembling in the morning dew. She never said anything directly to me, but one day I found a small wicker basket on my porch, 2 cucumbers, a handful of sugar snap peas, and a folded note that just read, "Thank you." Wildlife followed. Ducks nested in the newly restored bends of Willow Creek. Turtles sunbathed on mossy rocks that had spent years buried under Maggie's decorative gravel. Miguel spotted a bobcat one morning and sent me a blurry photo. The creature paused mid-step, eyes like polished amber, as if it too was wondering where all the silence had gone. The transformation wasn't just ecological, it was human. After the courtroom collapse, the HOA didn't just shrink, it fractured. Rick resigned under federal investigation. Maggie tried to salvage her reputation with a series of tone-deaf press releases, but they landed flat. Her neighbors, once her chorus of lawn code enforcers, stopped answering her calls. By late summer, the HOA board officially dissolved. But we didn't let the void stay empty. With Amanda's help and support from the Sierra Club, Miguel and I formed something new, the Willow Creek Land and Water Trust. Not a bureaucracy, not another top-down hierarchy, a community-led coalition built by farmers, old-timers, newcomers, and even former HOA residents who were tired of fighting their own neighbors. We mapped out the watershed boundaries, filed conservation deeds, and created open access zones for wildlife corridors and pollinator gardens. School kids helped plant trees, retired engineers rebuilt the footbridge over the creek. One of Maggie's former allies, believe it or not, volunteered to teach free weekend classes on local water law, said she wanted to be part of fixing what she'd helped break. And then there was Miguel. I bought back his farm. Not because he asked, he never would, but because I knew Pops would have wanted that land to stay in hands that loved it. Miguel's father had once helped dig the original irrigation trenches when Pops was just starting out. That farm deserved to live again, so we signed the papers under the oak tree that split our properties. No lawyers, just ink, hands, and the kind of deal where both parties already know they're doing the right thing. We turned the northern pasture into a seed bank, native grasses, drought-resistant beans, crops that didn't need corporate fertilizer to thrive. Miguel's kids named the new section Pops's Field, said it made the old man sound like a legend. Maybe he was. I still read his journals sometimes. The last one he wrote in, the leather one with the water-stained spine, ends with a short line, just 4 words. Don't let them win. He never specified who they were. Developers, bureaucrats, time, maybe all of them. But I think he'd smile if he saw what happened here. How a dam didn't divide a community, it defended it. How water wasn't the weapon they feared, but the memory they tried to erase. And how that memory came back, slow and wide and strong. I walk the edge of the creek every Sunday morning now. Same trail Pops used to take. Sometimes I see Miguel fixing a fence line, or Mrs. Chen watering a row of beans. Sometimes I see no one at all. Just the creek, flowing exactly where it should. They'll probably say this was about revenge. They always do. People who don't know the land, who think justice is loud and angry and covered in headlines, but they weren't there. They didn't walk the back pasture with Pops. They didn't see the way water curls around a rock when it's allowed to move freely, or how silence can say more than a gavel ever will. This wasn't about flooding homes. It was about flooding lies. About reminding people that deeds mean something. That stewardship can outlast greed, that when the laws are on your side and the truth runs deeper than their cement, you don't have to shout, you just have to open the gates and let the land speak for itself. The Willow Creek Restoration Trust is real now. Not just a name on paper, it's neighbors planting seeds, teachers leading tours for school kids, engineers repairing erosion trails, and veterans with toolboxes volunteering weekend after weekend. It's what Pops always said land should be, something that gives back. But we're not done. Because just over the ridge, past where the creek finally settles into still water, there's a company trying to claim eminent domain on another family's property. Says they're building a solar innovation hub. That family's last name is Cardenas. They've owned their land longer than the utility company has existed. And now they're being told they can't stop it. Sound familiar? That's a different fight, but it's coming. And I've already walked that property. I've seen the survey markers. I've read the contracts. I've met the daughter, 16 years old and stubborn as a rusted nail. She's not leaving. So yeah, the next storm is on the horizon, but I've been through one flood already. And I know exactly how to build the dam. Before I go, if you've ever been through something like this, an HOA overreach, a neighbor war, a property line fight where the odds were stacked against you, I want to hear it. Drop your story in the comments. Let's make this a place where the little guy still gets the last word. You'd be surprised how many people are quietly fighting the same battles, and how much power there is in telling the truth out loud. If you're still listening, I appreciate you. We don't always get to win. But sometimes when the facts are sharp and the water runs true, we do. And when we do, it flows farther than we ever thought it could. Stick around, the next story's just down the road.